Hi guys, it's the Forgetful Scholar, and this week we're talking about two books. And it's kind of an odd week for me. None of the two books are romance novels. I know, I'm shocked too, but let me explain. So the first book is a nonfiction, and my mom read it, and then she was like, you gotta read it, you gotta let me know what you think. So that's what the first book is, okay? So the first book is called Silent Dancing, A Partial Remembrance of a Puerto Rican Childhood by Judith Ortiz Cofer. So here we go. Okay. Now, as I said before, what the hell is my hair? You know, I don't know what my hair is doing. It's living its best life. Let's move on. Okay. So, as I said before, my mom is Puerto Rican. And my dad is from Spain. So my mom, her dad, my grandfather was in the military. So she spent and her sister spent childhood bouncing from New York to Puerto Rico and back and forth, right? Okay. So when she heard about this book, she's like, you gotta read it. You know, I read it and this and that really resonated with me. Let me know what you think. I was like, okay. And this book isn't a book I feel comfortable with doing a rating on because some of this shit hit deep. You know, like it hit different. So also the author, Judith, she's around the same age as my mom, so their childhood experiences are very prevalent for my mom. And Judith's family, her father was in the Air Force, so they went from, not Air Force, military, so from Puerto Rico to New Jersey, Patterson, New Jersey to Puerto Rico, back and forth, right? So some things really resonated with my mom that didn't so much for me, but then other things really resonated for me. Like my mom, for example, I'm not going to say everything, we talked about, but for example, being the translator for her mother, because my mom's also the oldest of like a bazillion sisters. So that was very much like on my mom to be kind of like the translator and stuff like that. Being in Puerto Rico and speaking Spanish and like people thinking she's a gringa, which is like an American, So those are just some of the things that really resonated for her. Some of the things that really resonated for me, because this author, her father is a very Spaniard culture, Puerto Rican, like they really held on to the Spaniard culture and that. So she felt like a kid of two cultures, And yes, as a child of a multicultural family, I get that. I still remember in elementary school, I think it was, when I was trying to explain to one of my friends, and we're kids, whatever, that my mom's Puerto Rican, my dad's Spaniard, and she's like, oh, isn't that just the same thing? And I didn't have like the words to express like how no, they're two very different cultures, but especially since we were so young, I think, oh, you all speak Spanish, so it's kind of like lumped in together. I'm not saying they still thought that as we got older. I'm just saying, at that age, So I do remember that. And the part about like being self-conscious about speaking Spanish, I feel that deeply. Like, because I know when I speak Spanish, I have a very, Castellano, or like Española, a very Spaniard accent. I know I do. And speaking Spanish to like my grandmothers of both sides, I was always so self-conscious. It's a thing that happens when you're a kid, and it's the kid anxieties are kind of the hardest to address as an adult. Even today, speaking Spanish to my grandma, it's sort of like I get a little anxious about it, which is silly because it's not like my grandmother would like make fun of me or anything like that. I still like understand perfectly what she's saying, and I am bilingual. It's just, I don't know, speaking Spanish in front of someone who is like Spanish is their first language, I always get self-conscious. Even now, I get self-conscious. So I really felt that. And this whole book has a very half-remembered dream quality to it, and that's on purpose, because this is her memories that kind of, you know how they say, like, dance to the beat of your own drum. So that's kind of what this is about, that her memories and her experiences being who she is and who her family is kind of built who she is. So she's silent dancing to her own beat. Like, I get that. It's all half remembered, vague quality to it. Some of the things I surprised how, like, deep it hit. And it's not like these are all, like, horrible stories or all happy stories. It's just because they relate, like, because they hit personally, I was like, oh, okay. So it's a really good book, One of my aunts is like, come on, I want to read it. Finish it up. I'm like, okay. It's a very easy read. I will, even if your cultures aren't Spanish or Latin and anything like that, if you're a person who's multicultural, if you're first generation, second generation, even third generation, I think some of the stories in here will really get to you. Like, they'll resonate with you. So, like, I would definitely encourage to check it out. There's one story where the father is looking in the book. The father is looking for an apartment, and the manager is like, "No Cubans here," and he's like, "Oh, I'm Puerto Rican." He's like, "Same shit," and slams the door in his face. Apparently, something similar happened to my own grandfather. The thing I really love this book for is that opened up a dialogue tree. Wow. Okay. No. I think I have to get out more and talk to actual real people. What I liked about this book is that it started conversations with my family members that we really haven't had before. Like, I've heard stories of my mom's childhood that I've never heard before. My grandma's telling different kinds of stories. Seemed like my grandmother had always told me two stories, like two stories in two categories, since I can remember. One, how various farm animals in Puerto Rico tried to kill her. Hilarious. Second one, how young girls disappear and then found dead in Puerto Rico. So, like, the first one, obviously, she thinks they're funny. So she's sharing a funny story. Why various farm animals, everything from, like, roosters to horses, wanted her dead, I have no idea, but there we go, because she swears she wasn't doing anything. Humorous. The second one, because I studied folklore, I understand it's sort of like a way to teach lessons, sort of how humans first taught children how to be wary of the world. She didn't want me to be a naive person in the world, so, cautionary tales. I get it. But reading this book and talking to her about it, actually different stories from Puerto Rico have come out, which I find fascinating. And also kind of like, my grandma didn't have the easiest time of it. So also like, whoa, kind of heartbreaking at the same time. There is one story in this book where it was like a story that these two young girls disappeared. And it turns out one of the young girls was actually born male. The mother dressed them up in female their whole life. They thought they were female until like a while later, and the two girls didn't disappear. They fell in love, left the village, got married, and were in a different village. I was like, after I read that, I was like, what? And apparently, like, the father had no idea his daughter was born male. And I remember being like, that can't possibly be like a real story. That's gotta be like a herd from a herd, grapevine kind of thing. And my mom, again, same age group as the story, she's like, her and her sister, one of her sisters, the second, my mom's the oldest, and then the second sister, they were both like, oh yeah. Oh yeah, that happened all the time. And my grandma was like, oh yeah, that happens all the time in the villages. And I was like, why? Like, how did the fathers not know? And they looked at me like, oh, you sweet summer child. I was like, like what the? And they're like, no, that time Puerto Rican husbands never changed a diaper, never gave the kid a bath, like never helped in the child rearing. And like, I kind of understood, especially for the time period, like the 50s, very rigid gender roles. Happy we're past that, but there we go. But like reading that and then hearing their own stories from like the next village over, how that happened, really resonated, like how uninvolved at the time the husbands were in like the child rearing, and it kind of just blew my mind. I don't know why, but it really blew my mind. I feel like I'm just rambling. So it's a nonfiction. I can't say, like, I can't give it a star rating because it just resonated too much with me and like my family's personal experience. I don't think it'd be fair to try to put it in a box like that. Again, if you're multicultural, doesn't matter what the cultures are. If you're first generation, second, maybe even third, doesn't matter from where in the world. I think some of these stories will really hit you too. You know what I mean? So if you're interested, go ahead, give it a try. All right. Now, the second book. Now, for this book to talk about it, I kind of got like some secondary stuff prepared, which is rare for me. I don't prepare these things. Like, I read the books and then I slap some lipstick on, some makeup on, and then I film. I don't write a script. I probably should. I probably never will. So that's why these have like a rambling quality to it. But this book is the original prequel to Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, The Road to Neverwinter by Jaleigh Johnson. Now, if you saw my thrift book haul, then you've seen this book. And if you've watched a couple of these videos, you understand that fantasy is not my genre of choice. I like romance novels and then cozy mysteries, stuff like that. So that being said, also, I have played multiple campaigns of D&D. Right now, my friends and I are playing Pathfinder, besides the point, and I have DM'd, which is Dungeon which the Dungeon Master, which means you run the game. Also, a couple of campaigns. So reading this, I tried my hardest not to be like, oh, typical fantasy. Ugh, I hate. I tried to be really open-minded with this, and I tried not to be too critical about it. Being a huge fan of tabletop role-playing games. That being said, for me personally, and this is someone who does not like fantasy, 5 stars. I know. I'm shocked too. Okay, let's talk about it. So this obviously is for the movie that is out. I'm going to see it tomorrow. Kind of curious if reading the book gives me any kind of inside context to the movie. We'll see. Maybe I'll do a video on it. I don't know yet. So this follows Edgin, who is the Chris Pine character, who is a bard that doesn't really bard. Who is a bard that doesn't really sing and doesn't have any magic. Now, I do remember from I wasn't that surprised by it, because I saw the preview for the movie, and where Chris Pine, talking about, Chris Pine in character was like, someone's like, oh, what do you do? And he's like, I make up the plans. So I knew going into this book, he's sort of the mastermind. Now, the author, I kind of like the author's style. It wasn't overly flowery, overly wordy. Like some fantasy books that I have given a try before, they could do the more verbose, over-the-top language. Some of it works, and then sometimes I just feel like they like the sound of their own voice kind of feel to the books, and I'm not really a big fan. This author didn't do that. They had a subtle humor in it that I really enjoyed, and I think, I don't really read the acknowledgements, I probably should, I skimmed it, and it does seem that they do play D&D themselves, and you can kind of tell in this with some of the aspects of it. So going into it, I knew that, I'm just going to call him Ed. I knew that Ed was the mastermind, and I wondered if this book would tell me why he doesn't use magic, because bards in the game typically have magic. You know, their songs give inspiration, they get healed, they have magic, right? So I was wondering if this story explains why he doesn't. So this story takes place about 9 years. Well, I don't know how long before the movie, so I won't, you know, guess on that. But we start off, Ed is telling his daughter Kira a nighttime, like a bedtime story. So I like the tongue-in-cheek and how this book kind of followed in the same vein as like Neverending Story. Well, more Princess Bride, where it's a family member telling the story that we're reading said story to another family member as a bedtime story. So I thought that was kind of cute. That was tongue-in-cheek. So we open up. Ed is trying to get Kira to go to sleep. She's 9 or 10, and she's like, no, I want to hear the story of our origin story of the crew. So he's like, okay. So he goes in to tell it. And basically, it starts off with Ed pretty much in a depression. His wife is dead. He blames himself because he used to work for the Harpers, which are sort of like the good guys. You know what I mean? Like medieval FBI type stuff, okay? So, and he got enemies from it because he was very good at his job, and his wife died protecting their newborn, like their infant daughter. So he's by himself, not really mourning because he's trying to take care of Kira all by himself. And he's not working. He quit the Harpers because he blames that for his wife Zia's death. So, he hasn't left the house in weeks. He smells. He doesn't really have any money. He's been like selling his treasured possessions, like things like his wife meant a lot to his wife, just to get milk for Kira. Like he's in a bad way, right? So he ends up at the pub with Kira just to get treat himself a little bit. And that's where he meets Holga, which is like the barbarian character. I thought it was pretty cute because if you play D&D, you know that pretty much always meeting your band of crew, it always seems to happen in a tavern, right? Always. So Holga's kind of in a bad way too. You don't really get much why until later. But, he eventually feels bad, lets her stay the night. They become friends. I'm happy that it was just friendship. It wasn't, anything, because his wife just sorry. It just drives me nuts when fantasy writers try to hornshoe a romance when it's not necessary. Anyway, this is coming from someone who adores romance. Anyway, so Holga ends up staying with them. And then there's a time skip, which I'm not really the biggest fan of, but it wasn't horrible. I get it, probably because wanted to establish that Holga has been with Ed and Kira for a long time. That's why. So basically Holga hangs out, becomes his roommate, and there's a time skip for I'm forgetting something. With Holga, she sees there's not really anything in the house. He's selling everything, and he's to the pawnbroker in town, and the idea of stealing just kind of comes up. So Holga's important because this being's important because when they go steal from the corrupt and crooked pawnbroker, he kind of has this realization that he's got to do what he has to do for his family. He has to look out for his family. He can't keep holding on to these high morals from the Harpers. He's got to do what he's got to do, And he had fun. So, that kind of gets him out of his funk a little bit. So, time skip 9 years. Holga, Kira, and himself have been doing small heists from really corrupt people to keep the roof from kind of concaving on them and things like that. And I liked it because Kira and Holga have their own relationship because Holga's the only mother figure Kira has ever had. You see Holga and Ed have their own relationship of like this sort of friendly co-parenting thing going on. You know what I mean? And you see that Kira and Ed are a little strained because still 9 years later, he still hasn't dealt with his grief. So he's sort of hyper-focusing on heists and planning everything to the umpteenth and things like that, right? So Holga barely convinces him to go to the tavern to sing. It's a mess. The song brings up his dead wife. He gets all choked up. He's also drunk. This is where they meet the rogue character. And rogues are thieves, basically. And in this, they get attacked by gnolls. And here's one of the things. I'm taking out my monster manual. And this is what gnolls look like. Okay. So Holga, Forge Fitzwilliam, the rogue, and Ed go to get their shit back from the gnolls, especially the loot that meant so much to him that, makes him remember his wife and stuff like that. Now, I'm not going to go into every single detail of the book, despite what it seems like right now. But this encounter, and I say encounter because when you're playing D&D, you have encounters. It's basically where you either like try to steal something, try to trick somebody, or try to fight something, right? So this encounter had the feel of someone's real life game encounter that was just sort of, the rough edges was smoothed out because all the planning and then one bad roll and the planning goes to shit. And then you have to think on your feet to come up with something else. So that's what happens there. And then, so they bond, all three of them bond over that. And then later on, Ford comes back with like, hey, I got this big score, let's do it, kind of a thing. And on this encounter, they meet their sorcerer, Simon. So like, it's, the third act was kind of my favorite. It was very much the dungeon crawl, which is like a staple for D&D, which was so much fun to me. I will say in this book, he does not have magic. It doesn't seem like he's ever had magic, but I thought it was very clever how this author handled that. It seems like maybe a constriction for the movie. So going into the movie tomorrow, I'm not expecting the bard to bard. I'm not expecting him to have magic. So one of the spells in it is Unseen Servant. And it was very clever because Kira, who is now 9 and insists on going with them on these adventures, has an invisible amulet. So I was like, okay, she's acting as the invisible servant. An invisible servant is a spell where you create an invisible construct that can do everything a humanoid servant can do. So I thought that was clever. Ed does give a lot of inspirational speeches, which I think is super clever. He also, in this big battle, the end battle, he makes sure he gets like health potions into his fallen comrades. And I was like, oh, like cure wounds. Okay, get it. Cool. In one fight when this huge monster, and he acts as a distraction by singing an insulting song to the monster. And I was like, oh, vicious mockery. All right. That's another spell that bards can do, So I thought that was clever how the author kind of got around it like that way. I thought that was clever. There's a lot of fun things in this, like in this big grand ball that they're in. One of the specialty drinks is called Volo's Folly. Now, Volo is a book sort of like this, like the Monster Manual, but it's like a DLC for this. So it like adds more and new monsters to the game. So I thought that was super cute. The humor in it got me. This one point, because of course I'm picturing the actors while I'm reading this, right? This one point, the rogue was discussing how, to loot the bodies. And that's a common thing in D&D, to find coin, to find artifacts or weapons, or to find clues for your next encounter. Common. But for some reason, reading it and picturing Chris Pine saying, I don't want to loot dead bodies, that's icky, made me chuckle to myself for a good 2.5 minutes. Could have been the sleep deprivation. Yes, absolutely. But I still had a good time. You know what I mean? Like, I still have fun with it. So, for once, sleep deprivation was working in my favor. So I thought this author was very clever, and I liked the humor in it. I feel like I got a good sense of who these characters are and their backstory and how they connect and how much they mean to each other. So it made me even more hype for the movie, which I have not purposely looked at any reviews. I'm going to see it tomorrow, and I'm going to see if reading the book had any kind of impact of how I see the movie. Am I going to check out this author and maybe read another fantasy series from this author? I think I might, which is weird because, you know, that is not my thing. But I think I might. Wow. So, like, I had fun with this book. It was exactly what I wanted. A fantasy caper that had these, like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, when it came to the D&D game. In the big final third act, they have to help a dragonborn. My second. So this is a dragonborn. And, it just, like, even when I was reading this, because I know when I play, because I played enough campaigns, that if an NPC is coming with the party, I do not trust them. They will betray the group. I'm so paranoid about that. And then, like, reading this, the whole time I'm reading it with the dragonborn with them, I'm like, don't trust that shit. Don't trust it. I won't say whether that paranoia on my part or past trauma, whatever, was warranted. You know, if you read it, you'll enjoy yourself. So there we go. I know, no romance this week. I actually liked a fantasy. What is happening? What is happening? So when I see oh, I got so distracted. So when I see the movie, I might pop on again to see if the book had any impact on that. Let me know if you guys want that. I might do it anyway. I don't know. We'll see. Okay, I don't want to, but it's time for me to get back to the real world. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you later. Bye.